Good morning. Welcome to C3. My name's Tony, and like Becky said, make sure you grab a Thanksgiving, I was going to call them baskets, but I guess they're bags out in the lobby, and we need them back by next week. We're going to try to do around 120 of them, so we appreciate your help for that. But today we're going to continue our series, Didn't See That Coming, and I'm going to talk about a story in Luke today about one job that Jesus gives all of us. I hear people ask all the time, I don't know what my job is in life. I don't know what God's will for my life is. But we're going to talk about Jesus' one job for us today. But before we get started, I asked this in the first service, and I got one hand, and it was very disappointing. But who here has their Christmas tree up? Anybody? Okay. I like this section over here. It's the Christmas spirit section. What about your lights outside? Okay, I got my lights outside. I got people like, yeah, I don't know. But it's going to be a beautiful day. It's going to be 60 degrees. Get out there and get those lights up, guys. People will be like, oh, it's not even Thanksgiving yet. You can be pro-turkey and pro-Christmas at the same time, guys. So let's get that done. But speaking of Christmas, I was thinking about last year, we keep all of our Christmas decorations up in the rafters of our garage. And it's a very tall garage in there. And the only way to get up there is this old extension ladder that we have. It's pretty weak and flimsy, and we have a very slick floor in our garage, so it kind of slides really easily. And we live in the house I grew up in, and several years ago, my dad was getting stuff out of the rafters, and the ladder slid out from underneath him. He's hanging on and had to jump down because nobody was home, and I almost broke his ankles. So last year I said, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get my son, Preston, who would have been 9 at the time. I said, all you have to do is hold the ladder. And he was nervous about it. I said, just hold it, put your foot against it. That is all you have to do. That is your one job. So I'm almost to the top, and I feel it start sliding. And I look down, he's dancing around, not paying attention. I'm you had one job. And I was mad at him at first, but then I started thinking about when I was 9, my dad was kind of the guy that would do everything himself. So he was changing the brakes on the van. It was wintertime, it was cold. And I had one job, and that was to hold the light. And it's kind of like that meme I've seen before. It's some of you have never held the light for your dad, and it shows. Because you get thick skin when you hold the light for your dad. Because you're into it for the first 5 seconds, and then you're drifting off, and then you're getting yelled at, and some words are said. But we had one job, and we're going to talk about a story in the Bible today where Jesus gives us one job. But I have a few memes real quick of someone who had one job. They apparently didn't go to school because they couldn't spell it. Or McDonald's. We got one more, I think. If you read it straight across, you don't matter, give up. Wasn't the best place for that. But like Trent said last week, we were going down through Luke, and today we're talking about a story where Jesus gives us our one job. And he's going to tell a story about a nobleman, a guy who's going to become king. And he leaves the area for a while. And when he leaves, he calls up 10 servants and says, hey, I'm going out. They're going to appoint me king. And while I'm gone, I want you to do some business for me. I want you to engage in business for me. So he gives them some money. It's going to be called minas, not minners. It's not going fishing. I heard somebody say once, they said, you sound like Dale Earnhardt Jr. when you talk. I'm I don't know if that's a compliment or a put down, but I'm going to take it as a compliment. So we've got minas today, but not minners. And here's what he's going to do. We're going to read some verses quickly through Luke and see what the story says. It says in verse 11, while they were listening to this, he went on to tell them a parable because he was near Jerusalem, and the people thought that the kingdom of God was going to appear at once. So these people in Jerusalem thought that Jesus was going to be king that day. Immediately, he was going to have his kingdom set up. But in verse 12, it says, he said, a man of noble birth went to a distant country to have himself appointed king and then to return. So he called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 minas each. Put this money to work, he said, until I come back. But the subjects hated him and sent a delegation after him to say, we don't want this man to be our king. He was made king, however, and returned home. Then he sent for the servants who he had given the money in order to find out what they gained from it. The first one came and said, sir, your mina has earned 10 more. He said, well done, my good servant, the master replied, because you have been trustworthy in a very small amount, take charge of 10 cities. Then the second came and said, sir, your mina has earned 5 more. His master said, you take charge of 5 cities. Then another servant came and said, Sir, here is your mina. I have kept it laid away in a piece of cloth. I was afraid of you because you are a hard man. You take out what you did not put in, and you reap what you did not sow. His master replied, I will judge you by your own words, you wicked servant. You knew, did you, that I am a hard man, taking out what I did not put in and reaping what I did not sow? Why then didn't you put my money on deposit, so then when I come back, I could collect it with interest? Then he said to those standing by, Take his mina away from him and give it to the one who has 10 minas. Sir, they replied, he already has 10. He replied, I tell you that to everyone who has, more will be given. But as for the one who has nothing, even what they have will be taken away. And finally, in verse 27, but those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me. So there is a job here that Jesus has given us to do. It's pretty easy, simple story. Got the nobleman. He's leaving to become king. He pulls 10 servants in. He said, here's some money. It's about 100 days' wages, not a ton of money, but a little bit of money. Wouldn't be too life-changing. He said, I want you to engage in business. And in verse 13, he says, put this money to work, he said, until I come back. They thought Jesus could tell us he was going towards Jerusalem, that everyone thought he was going to be king immediately. He was going to have his kingdom. But he knew that he was going to have to die on the cross, raise 3 days later, ascend to heaven to his kingdom, and eventually have a kingdom on here at earth. But he knew it wasn't time for that yet. And what he's saying in this story, the reason he told this story, he's telling them, we are his servants, and we are to engage in business while he was gone. We have one job to do. And if you've not been paying attention yet this morning, or you're going to fall asleep, get this one thing first. Your one job until Jesus returns is to faithfully invest everything he's given to you. Our one job until Jesus returns is to faithfully invest everything he's given us. Notice it's all. He brought his servants in, 10 servants, gave them 10 minas, 100 days' pay. It wasn't a lot. He gave it to them, but notice it was still his. There's a book called Master Your Money. It has a little passage here I'm going to read. It says, God owns it all. God has the right to whatever he wants, whenever he wants it. It is all his, because an owner has rights, and us as a steward have only responsibilities. I may receive some benefits while maintaining my responsibilities, but the owner, God, retains ownership. Every single possession that we have comes from someone else, and that's God. I literally possess much, but we do not own anything. God benefits me by sharing his property with me. I have responsibility to him to use it in a way that blesses and glorifies God. So here he's talking about money, but it goes to every single thing in our life. When he's talking to his servants here, it's more than about money. It's about everything that we own. It applies to our influence, our money, our job, our friends, our family, our kids. We like to think they belong to us. And I think if I asked everybody in this church to say, do you truly believe everything is God's? Yeah, I'll say that. I would say that, yeah, everything. Until something happens I don't like. When our kid gets hurt, our kid gets sick, or someone dies early, we don't really believe that as much. And when you think about that, it can either be scary. Sometimes that scares me to think that. It's everything's God. I have no control. Or it can give freedom in that. It can be liberating. There's an old pastor named John Wesley. He was in the 1700s, and he did lots of amazing things. But one thing he said, one time he was out preaching, and they came and said, hey, Mr. Wesley, your house just burnt down. And just like any of us, we'd be like, oh. And for a moment, he's like, oh. But then he's like, you know what? That's God's house. That's one less responsibility I have. Why did he say that? Because he got it. He got it. And notice it was only 100 days' pay. Well, a lot of you are like, man, that's a lot of money. But it wouldn't be totally life-changing. And what he's saying, he gave them very little. And we often complain to God, God, if I had a bigger house, I could invite more people over, or if I had more money, I could give more for you. But he's saying here, it was very little. And the more dangerous part is like, maybe you say, I haven't been given much. God's not blessed me with very little. It doesn't let you off the hook. And there's three possible outcomes today. God's telling us here we have one job, to use everything in our life, everything we have, invest it for Him. And there's going to be three types of people out of that. Three types of people. The first is rebellious. Category one is the rebellious. It said in verse 14, but his subjects hated him and sent a delegation after him to say, we don't want this man to be king. This category is not hard to figure out. There's just some people who will never submit to Jesus. There's some people who's like, I want to be inclusive of all the gods. I want the universe and karma. But God's telling us here, you can't be half in and half out. You're either all in or you're all out. And Jesus offers forgiveness today for those who oppose him. But it clearly states if they ignore the opportunity, there will be judgment. So first category is rebellious. That's an easy category to see. Some people will not submit to Jesus. Number two, the second category is faithfulness, the faithful. In verse 16, one servant reports that his mina had made 10 more. He made 1,000% profit. And here's what the king said to him in verse 17. Well done, my good servant. His master replied, because you've been trustworthy in the very small matter, in the very small things in our life, take charge of 10 cities. Here the king tells him three different things. First he gives him accommodation. Well done, good servant. Number two, he gives him the reason, because you've been faithful in the very little. And then lastly, he gives him a promotion. You will have authority over 10 cities. And this is repeated with the next servant. He made his 10, he made 5 more, had a 500% profit. But here's the principle today. When Jesus returns, he will judge us for our faithfulness. Those who are found faithful will be rewarded. The two possible incomes so far are rebellious and faithful. Then the third category, maybe a little surprising, maybe a little scary, kind of gets me a little bit, is the negligent servant. In verse 20 it said, then another servant came and said, sir, here is your mina. I've kept it laid away in a piece of cloth. He didn't lose it. He really didn't do anything that bad. He just kind of wrapped it in a piece of cloth or a napkin and kept it. He said, I was afraid of you because you are a hard man. You take out what you did not put in, and you reap what you did not sow. The guy played it safe. He probably figured, you know what? If I go out and work this and I make profit, the king's going to take it from me anyway. And then if I lose it, man, I'm going to be in for it. He's a hard man. I'm scared of him. So he's paralyzed by fear. He didn't want to be active, so he just was conservative. He just held it tight to him. And we get that way ourselves. So many times in our life, or my life, I felt like, you know what? You go to church, your kids go to Cross Kids, you may have them in Awanas, you may wear a cross necklace, you may wear a WWJD bracelet like Trent made fun of last week. But when it comes down to it, we don't trust our lives with God. We don't trust everything we have with God. We play it for ourselves. We have a great outer appearance, but when it comes down to it, we don't truly give it to God. I quoted Master Your Money earlier, and he talked about how everything we own, money, influence, kids, family, is God's. And we know that God owns it all. And this servant probably had that mindset. He's like, I know God owns it all, but God's not here right now. I'm trying to do my best with it. I know he owns my bank account, but I know he wants me not to use it certain ways. I know he wants me to keep it for me. And I might as well use it the way I want because you only go around once. You only live once. But the servant here, the negligent servant, had that same attitude. And here's what he said to him. I will condemn you with your own words, you wicked servant. You knew that I was a superior man, taking what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow. Why did you not put my money to the bank, get interest? And he says, I tell you that everyone who has, more will be given. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Jesus is saying, use it or lose it. The guy was trying to be conservative and not use it for God. He had these great things that God gave him. Just like in our lives, we have these great family. You might have a great home. You might have a great job. Whatever it is God's given you, but we don't want to use it. And here in this story, what did he do? He took it away from him. So I want you to think about that in your life today. And I watched the show, I think it was on like Nat Geo or something like that. And it was about sorting eggs. And it was in Canada, and we may do it a little bit different in the U.S., but they had all these eggs, and they were sorting them in this like factory, this egg sorting place or whatever. But they had all these eggs coming down the conveyor belt. egg after egg, and they were sorting them every which way. And it said they sorted them into extra large, large, and medium. But one thing I found interesting when they were sorting all these eggs, it didn't go by the size, the outer appearance. It didn't go by the shell. You could have this big shell, this egg with this big, nice shell, but it didn't weigh enough. It went strictly by weight. It went by what you couldn't see on the outside. It had the big eggs, it could be a medium, or vice versa. And I started thinking about our lives with relation to the egg. We could have a very nice shell. We could do all the right things. We could look nice. We could come to church this morning. We could put our kids in Christian schools. We could talk about Jesus. We could post it on Facebook. We could have all the right things. And then I imagine one day he's talking here when we're in front of Jesus. And I'm not talking about salvation. I'm talking about where we're standing in front of Jesus with our shells, with our eggs, and we're being sorted. Obviously, the rebellious, never gonna accept Jesus, never gonna follow him. It doesn't have a good ending for them. Then we have the faithful. They have a nice shell. Maybe they have a nice shell. Maybe they don't. Maybe it's a little shell. But when Jesus weighs their life, when he looks at the things he's given them and how they invested it, and then there's the negligent servant. God's gave you lots of good things. You maybe not even did anything really that bad in life. Maybe you I did all the right things. I never denounced Jesus. I tried to follow Jesus. I went to Sunday school. I went to church. I brought my family to this church. But then truly, how did you invest everything that God's given you while he's gone? How did you invest your time? How did you invest your family? How did you invest your influence? Did you use it for God? Or did you just keep it tucked away so you wouldn't lose it? I would like to talk about Jesus more, but I'm afraid people won't like me anymore. I like to give more to people, but then what about my savings or this or that? Did we truly invest everything that God's given you? And as we close today, I want you to truly think about your life as an egg. How's your shell? Do you look good to other people? Are you looking good to other people? Then how much do you weigh? When you get in front of Jesus one day, is he going to look at you and say, "Well done, good and faithful servant"? And maybe you're expecting that. Maybe you think, "Man, I've done everything right." And you get in front of him, and when he puts you on the scales and weighs your insides, he condemns you. He says, what was you thinking? I gave you all this nice stuff in life to engage in my business while I was gone, and you did nothing. You had a wasted life. You look good, but when you're weighed on the scale, you had a wasted life. So as we pray today, let's think about that. God, thank you for this group of people. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to come together today and give us the opportunity to think about our lives. I ask that we reevaluate our lives today, how we're living for you. You might be sitting there like, "Well, I don't have anything. God's never blessed me with anything." It doesn't have to be a lot. The story in the Bible talks about the very little. He gave them very little to invest. And he waited to see how they invested that before they gave him more responsibilities. And not saying that God's going to give you a bigger house or nicer things. He wants you to be more influence for his kingdom. He wants you to use every part of your life for his kingdom. And that can be scary. I mean, we might be our money away, but when it's like, "Oh, I don't know about my family," or "I don't know about this," or "I don't know about that." But when God weighs us, when we're in front of him, how will your weight rack up? And if you're here today and you fall into that first category, the rebellious, like you've never followed Jesus, you're like, "I don't even know if that's for me." God clearly states that he forgives those who come to him. So I'm going to give you that opportunity today. If you've never lived for Jesus, today could be your day. All you have to do is say this simple prayer. "God, thank you for sending your son to die on the cross. I don't want to be half in. I don't want to be half out. I want to make my life completely yours. So today I ask that you save me. I ask that you make my life yours. I'm ready to give everything in my life for you." If you said this prayer for the very first time with no one looking around, I would love for you to put your hand up and put it right back down. We're not going to embarrass you. We're not going to call you out front, anything like that. Awesome. God, thank you for this group of people. We love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, have a great week. Don't forget to grab, I was going to pick one up, but Thanksgiving basket out there. Bring it by next week. Have a great week.